All right, the second half of Powell, Chapter 7. Starting out with some of the explanations, the theories that have been brought forth and developed regarding why sexual harassment takes place. Now, understand these are theories. I'm not saying that they're true. We're simply saying these are the theories that have been developed to possibly explain the existence of sexual harassment. You will have to look through them yourself and decide which ones you believe and why, or you disbelieve and why. So the first one is the evolutionary model, which states that sexual harassment represents a type of behavior, sexuality in general, to be accepted, rather than a problem to be solved. Essentially, individuals with strong sex drives are sexually aggressive due to biology. Therefore, it is not particularly surprising or concerning. It's natural. So basically, what this is saying is that you shouldn't even worry about it. And also I wanted you guys to know that when these models were developed, they were specifically discussing males harassing females because, back in the day, that's all we talked about, even though now things have changed and there's some other things going on. So the evolutionary model is basically stating that, look, there's nothing you can do about it. It's perfectly natural. Stop worrying about it. It's not a problem. It's reality. It exists, and you should just get over it because it's natural. Now remember, I said I didn't necessarily believe all these. I'm just going to talk to you about the theories that are developed and brought forth in our textbook. The next one is the socio-cultural model. Now this particular idea, this theory is that sexual harassment is actually about power and dominance. Okay, so according to this view, people with the least amount of power are the most likely to be harassed. Therefore, in a patriarchal society, which is what we still have, men are expected to be dominant and women are expected to be compliant. Therefore, sexual harassment of women by men could be viewed as an actual right. This particular model is very interesting. Remember we talked before about being a victim of sexual harassment and how to not be a victim. What can you do? And part of what we talked about was do not appear weak. That the average harasser actually looks for someone that is weak. Someone who's not going to be capable of fighting back. This has been proven many times over in studies. So this model is interesting because it addresses that, okay, and it talks about power inequity and the fact that people with the least amount of power are the ones most likely to be harassed. I think it's very interesting. Now, first of all, I'll confess to you that I'm terrible with movie names, if you guys haven't already noticed that. I try and reference them sometimes to give you some sort of current framework in our culture, and I'm just awful with the names. But there was a movie, and I believe it was Demi Moore who starred in it, and she was this powerful businesswoman, and she sexually harassed a man who had less power than her. It was very interesting because we always see, depicted men harassing women. So I thought it was interesting to see that reversal, and they did show a woman harassing a man. However, it was definitely there with a power inequity. Had it been the other way around and the man had more power than the woman and the woman was going after him, it probably wouldn't even be considered sexual harassment. He would have said no, go away, and that would have been the end of it. Whereas when the power inequity is involved and the person harassing has more power, the person with less power doesn't have that power to say just stop. Does that make sense? So this particular model is very interesting because if you've ever studied theories about sexual assault and rape, you will know that they say that it's not motivated by sex per se, but more about power and dominance. The next possible theory to explain harassment is the organizational model. The fact that organizational characteristics could indeed set the stage for sexual harassment. The traditional top-down hierarchy, now you remember, that's what we talked about when it's like a pyramid, the person, the teeny tiny top has the most power, and the The vast majority of the people are actually the weakest people down at the bottom. Think about the way a pyramid is designed. So the traditional top-down hierarchy grants higher-level employees legitimate power over lower-level employees. A higher power differential means greater levels of sexual harassment. So what this is saying is the way you design your organization could actually increase or decrease your chances of sexual harassment. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it, but if you design, okay, the web-centered, right, the one we looked at where it was more transformational rather than transactional management, that we're all in this together, that we're dependent upon each other for success, that even though one person might technically have more power than another, they're still dependent on everybody else in that organization for their success. Therefore, the theory is that a transformational style of organization, more of the leading from the center, the web of inclusion, whichever one of those you want to call it, is less likely to have the sexual harassment characteristics than a top-down, traditional top-down hierarchy. Does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm saying? That the top-down hierarchy creates more of an obvious power inequity and the ability to abuse. Not that, you know, the ability to abuse your power is always there, but it's more prevalent and more likely in a top-down hierarchy than in the managing from the center, the web of inclusion. The gender spillover model says that the effects of gender role expectations, and the magic word there is expectations, are emphasized. Remember that we expect people to behave within certain roles, don't we? I mean, we've talked about this before, about getting prototypes in your head, and when someone steps out of the role that you have decided that they should play and what happens. So gender role expectations. So when we look at groups that are skewed, do you remember that a skewed group means that the vast majority of the group is made up by one sex, okay? And then the minority is going to have this problem, a greater issue with sexual harassment, because the differences are so emphasized. You know, again, that's something we talked about before. Do you remember that in skewed groups where that little group of people doesn't fit in? And we've talked about the way people can influence each other in a large group, and maybe they would do things they wouldn't do if they were not part of such a great majority. So gender role spillover model in a skewed group says that what could happen is the gender that's the greatest majority then heightens the differences between the two, even if they're not real. Remember this, you can do this in your head, and you start to notice all those differences, and then we have, you know, an atmosphere that is just ripe for sexual harassment. And then the individual differences model says, listen, even when working under the exact same condition, people behave differently. It depends on each individual how they're going to act, and you might have a top-down hierarchy with super tremendous power inequities involved, and it might be skewed so there's more men than women, and yet each person makes the decision on how they behave. Therefore, it's the individual differences that decide whether or not sexual harassment takes place. So what do you think of them all? Go over them all, and then, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. First of all, obviously you need to read your book and do a little research, but then think about it. Which one do you think holds the greatest amount of truth in your life experience and in your experience in the workplace or school or whatever you have to use as your model? Take a look at it for yourself, and maybe it's a combination of some of these, or maybe sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other, but I want you to really take a look at each one of these. And I think that everything always needs to pass the real life test, but also always remember that you can't take one unique experience and project that one experience onto everything. So kind of look around the world, you know what I mean? Pay attention to what's going on around you in our government, in our culture and society in general, and start seeing which one of these models you think is the most likely to apply in today's workplace as an explanation for why sexual harassment is still occurring in a culture where this is something that's talked about, we are educated about it, and we do everything we can to prevent it. So why is it still going on? Now, this is a survey that was taken of federal employees. This survey was, of course, about sexual harassment. So I want you to take a look at it because these are the statistics from the females. These are the statistics from the males. Green represents being harassed by the opposite sex. Okay? So these females were harassed by males, and these males right here were harassed by females. Then take a look at harassed by the same sex, and you'll see right here that 21% of the men who said they had been sexually harassed were harassed by other men, as compared to women, where only 1% of the people who were harassed, these women were harassed by another woman. And then the other sources, which might sound a little odd, but if you caught the note, it says sometimes there's like anonymous letters, so we don't know if the harasser was male or female. And how, honestly, that's very, very bizarre to me. But sure enough, one time in my little mailbox at work, I got an anonymous letter. Now, it didn't happen to be about me. It happened to be about another employee. But yeah, this person put it in my mailbox. I was horrified and went to my boss and basically holding it by the very corner, like, I don't even want my fingerprints on this, and showed it to him, and I was very, very distraught. I didn't want anything to do with it. Hey, I'm not stupid. I want nothing to do with this, right? And he just shook his head and said, yeah, the 4 or 5 of these were distributed. Now, here's the weird thing. I didn't know the male employee that it was about. I didn't even know who it was. So very, very strange. And yet then I saw this and went, oh yeah, I actually got one of those anonymous letters. So weird as it is, yes, it does exist, and that's why you'll see those statistics. So if you're ever thinking, why do we always talk about, the book really tends to focus on males harassing females, take a look at the statistics. Now, one of the other factors that you kind of have to look at in this is how many men don't consider it harassment. Because remember, sometimes there's kind of like this culture of that men should be glad and happy and oh yeah, it's like something to be proud of that some gal at work was all over you. So what happens is sometimes men don't consider it harassment. It's more of a wink wink nudge nudge type of thing. So that could also skew this number lower, that some men really are sexually harassed but don't consider it sexual harassment, and that it could be a culture there where it's actually considered something to be proud of. So that could have skewed this number a little bit. Now, let's take a look at the power differential of the harassers. Okay, the first thing I want you to notice is this happy little asterisk that warns you that some of these numbers, if you add them up, might actually be over 100%, which might not seem like it makes sense. But the thing is, you could be the victim of more than one type of harassment or by more than one individual. So maybe you were harassed both by a superior and by a coworker. So therefore, this number could actually be over 100%. Does that make sense? Go with me on this one. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Green represents being harassed by a superior. This kind of gray color by a subordinate. And the orange being harassed by a coworker, someone who is essentially at the same level or very, very close to the same level as you and doesn't have a tremendous amount of power over you. So take a look at those numbers. I found one of the things to be most surprising was harassment by subordinates. I cannot fathom. I mean, okay, first of all, I would never sexually harass anyone, okay? But let's just pretend and say I would. I cannot fathom being stupid enough to harass a superior. But there it is, right there. I did think, I really thought that via this particular form of research that we would have seen the green bar being much higher than it really is, which tells us that we've come a long way in our education and that these managers were highly trained, okay? But look at the work we have to do here. Obviously, all that fabulous sexual harassment training that we're taking is not enough, and we're not doing something right. Are we not giving them enough training, or is it that we're not giving effective training, the right kind of training, meaningful training, rather than instead of eye rolling, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to do this every year. You know, does that make sense? That it's not something that we're just blowing off. It looks like it is. It looks pretty much like a lot of people just consider it silly and it's not real and I shouldn't have to do this and who cares type of attitude, because obviously there is an issue, isn't there, with subordinates harassing subordinates. Is it the culture of the organization? You know, is that what's affecting it? It actually needs greater research. It's very interesting, and one of the reasons I was so happy that they used this particular study is because they're federal employees, and federal employees get a tremendous amount of training every year. Okay, this is not an optional thing. They are all over this, and yet look at the numbers on those coworkers. So very interesting to see why it is this way. Seeing that it is subordinates that are harassing each other the majority of the time. Very interesting study. Now, how much does sexual harassment cost? Well, let me tell you, sexual harassment, besides the fact that your employer needs to stop sexual harassment simply for the fact that it's illegal, it's immoral, and all that good stuff, of course that should be their top priority, but what about how much it costs? Take a look at this. In 2 years, $327 million. And where does that money come from? They're federal employees. It comes from our tax dollars. Ouch. That is an absolute nightmare. Now, every single employer is concerned with their bottom line. Therefore, even if they don't want to stop sexual harassment for the, and I use this in air quotes, the right reasons, the moral reasons, the correct reasons, every single employer has financial reasons to want to prevent sexual harassment in their organization. The cost to the individuals is huge. If any of you have ever been the victim of any type of harassment, and maybe even just, you know, a terrible boss that can't stand you and harasses you every day when you're at work, then you will know when they start talking about the cost of the individual, yeah, I mean, your physical health. Have you ever had a job where you were so miserable that you couldn't sleep at night? Which of course in turn causes fatigue, which of course is going to drop your productivity levels. It really can cause anxiety. You don't want to go to work anymore. You're depressed about the whole situation. It just can wear on a person so much. When it wears on your employee and it affects their physical health, their mental health, it affects their job-related attitudes, particularly their organizational commitment, then it costs the employer money because that person has lost productivity, tremendous amount of productivity. So the employer always has a tremendous interest in trying to prevent sexual harassment. Now, moving from sexual harassment to workplace romance. Your book is very heavy in this particular chapter on workplace romance. And one of the reasons is because we've seen so many high-profile cases in the news over the last decade. The truth is, we know that employees date each other and have what we refer to as a sexual relationship. But I want you to know that is not always a reference to actual sexual intercourse, but a sexual relationship as in, and they call it romance, okay? But it's considered a sexual relationship, okay? So please don't mistake it if I'm using the term sexual relationship. It does not necessarily mean I am talking about two people engaging in physical intercourse. Okay, so let's talk first of all about some of the theories of the causes of this. Sternberg's triangular theory of love. All right, intimacy, feelings of closeness and connectedness, passion, feelings of romance and sexual attraction, and the desire for sexual consummation. Desire for it. It didn't necessarily happen. And then the third phase would be decision commitment, the decision that you actually are in love with your fellow employee and you choose to make a commitment to maintain that love. This is such a complicated situation for so many organizations, and you really can't prevent it. You really can't. The only thing you can prevent would be a relationship where there's a power inequity. Okay, you can prevent that one. You can make that one against the rules, but you really can't prevent your people from dating each other. And there's always exceptions, of course, but it's pretty rare. And I'll tell you, since we did the whole NFL cheerleader thing, that is one of the places where there's a written contract that says you will not have a sexual relationship with any of the players, or I should say it probably says date them. But again, it's rare. The average employer knows that their people are going to date each other. It's going to happen, particularly in a very large organization. So the 3 stages of workplace romance: interpersonal attraction, romantic attraction, and then the decision to actually engage in that workplace romance. Interpersonal attraction is influenced by physical proximity. You guys, do you realize that most people who work full-time spend more time with fellow employees than they do with their own family? If you think about the number of hours a day that you're at work compared to the number you're at home, and the fact that when you're at home, you have to sleep, and you may have to do chores and errands that are outside of the home, and you may have other commitments outside of the home. Therefore, the average employee spends more time with their coworkers than they do with their own family. Physical proximity, location of the employee's areas of work. Functional proximity, the closeness that results from the actual conduct of work. Generally speaking, employees with higher physical and functional proximity are more likely to be attracted to each other. You're spending all your time together, you're working together, and let's face it, when you're at work, you can't be rude and nasty. You have to put on a better face, right? The average person, you can't just say whatever you're thinking. You can't get mad and spew 4-letter words. You have to be on your best behavior. And that can be really enticing. You're spending all this time with this person. They're fabulous and wonderful. Well, of course they are. They're at work. You know, it can be like a false relationship. Does that make sense to you? It can look really good because they're at work and because you just have so much in common. Well, no, you just have in common what's right there at work. One of the ways that an employer actually can start to thwart this if they see it happening is to eliminate physical proximity and functional proximity. And you can do that. It's really not that difficult in a large organization. In a small one, it could be. In a large organization, if a good manager is keeping an eye on this and sees something that starts to look like this could be trouble, you can easily reassign your employee. It's not that you did anything wrong. What are you talking about? You're so fabulous. I need you on this project over here. Oh, but I'm not, I don't care. You're so great. I need to move you. I need your expertise. You're going to have to go work on this project over here. And a lot of times that's all it takes, is to eliminate the physical and functional proximity. And a lot of times you can thwart that fabulous romance if there's a reason why the manager is looking at it and saying, I don't like what I see, particularly if one of them is married. So, development of workplace romances is caused by individual attitudes towards workplace romance, okay? Does engaging in a workplace romance fulfill one of these needs? Job motives, ego motives, or love motives? Now, job motive, that's the desire for advancement, job security, or financial reward. That's the person who's going to engage in a relationship for their own personal advancement. Ego motives, the desire for excitement. That one's very, very normal for most people. Adventure or ego satisfaction of, look who I got. I got the person in the organization that everybody thinks is so hot and everyone else wants them and they're with me. So that's an ego satisfier. And then there really is that love motive. Maybe the person really is, they fall in love. They have a desire for intimacy and passion, and then they move on to that decision commitment phase. It is entirely possible that that is true. In fact, it's actually, again, in large organizations, really, really common. And I have to tell you, before I read all the stuff in this book about workplace romance, I don't think I ever realized how many couples I worked with who were married when I worked for a large multi-billion-dollar corporation in a huge manufacturing plant. And I don't think I even realized just how many people there were married until I started looking at all this. And pretty soon I started counting them off. And I think I knew like 10 married couples. Isn't that funny? And I never paid any attention to it because none of them worked in the same organization. They all worked in different organizations. I never once saw a lick of trouble, ever. If they ever had fights and were angry with each other, you might notice a little tension, or the other spouse wasn't as round as much as usual, or didn't come over for lunch or whatever, but never. I never saw a problem. I never saw a negative effect on anyone's work. And I just was thinking about that and thinking it's kind of funny how I had not even noticed it. But yes, there were a ton of married couples there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that can influence it, like sex differences and attitudes about workplace romance. Studies show us that men are more likely to be tolerant of sexual relationships in the workplace than women. The nature of the job. What if there are a lot of business trips that these people go on together? What about the organizational culture? Is it acceptable to have a workplace romance? Now, I worked once for a boss, and he was married. And he was married when I got there, but I found out later that the person he was married to used to work for him. She was his assistant. I can't remember if she was a secretary or not, but she was his assistant. So, you know, I'm pretty sure in that particular organization that there was a culture that there was nothing wrong with workplace romance, considering that the top dog there had met and married his wife who had worked for him. Sex ratios in the organization, department, or group. Skewed groups. Employees may be more inclined to become romantically involved when the work setting is numerically dominated by one sex, which means we talked before about the attitudes that can occur when there is one sex that is dominant and sexuality differences become heightened. Therefore, the employees may be more inclined to engage in sexual relationships. Now, when we start looking at the dynamics of a workplace romance, two people involved, each has one of three motives: job, ego, or love. We talked about that before, about whether it advances your job, it makes you feel good about yourself, increases your ego, or it's an actual love thing, okay? There are 9 possible combinations of those 3 motives. The 4 most common: fling, it's ego for both partners. True love, it is an actual loving, committed relationship for both partners. There's a job benefit for them both. Mutual users. It's not one person using the other, but they are both using each other to attempt to increase or benefit their career. And then there is the utilitarian relationship, which is ego for one and job benefit for the other. In that case, they are still both using each other. One to say, hey, look at me, look how great I am, look what I can do. And the other one is trying to get something positive for their career out of pursuing that relationship. Key variables in those dynamics: power and dependency. Always. Power, exploitation, it can occur in both hierarchical and lateral romances, depending upon how the organization is designed, okay? So we start looking at the dependency. When a worker depends on another in order to perform his or her function effectively, okay? Career dependency, when someone's desire for advancement is dependent on the consent of another. And then personal sexual dependency. One or both becomes dependent upon their partner, and this threatens the normal exchange of task and career dependency. And this is where we see massive, massive problems come in, because they threaten the normal exchange, where it becomes so into this relationship that it actually threatens their ability to do their job. Have you worked with that person? I know I have, and they become so obsessed with the other person that it has a negative influence on their job. And I can remember one person I worked with who was dating a coworker, and they became obsessed with, well, who were they talking to? How long did they spend over at that cube? And what are they doing over in so-and-so's area? And it just became an absolute mess. So, when are couples more likely to be secretive about their workplace romance? First of all, the organizational culture doesn't allow it, just frowns on it, doesn't like that going on. Anytime there's a hierarchical romance, because that is almost always illegal or highly suspect and can cause some serious issues when you have a power inequity. Or how about when one or both partners are married? Yeah, that's going to cause you to hide that little workplace romance. And I always make a joke here, and it's really not funny, but it's one of those things that's not funny, but it is. And again, working for this large, humongous organization, and this guy started driving his motorhome to work every day, and he told his wife that it was because the motorhome wasn't being driven enough. I don't know, maybe you might be a little suspicious when your spouse starts driving the motorhome to work. Needless to say, what was going on at lunchtime? I don't know. Gas is a little expensive. Do you really think you should drive the motorhome instead of the Hyundai? I'm just asking. All right, what happens when the romance is ended? And this is why most organizations really hope that romance isn't going to happen, even though they know it will. It's because what happens if it isn't a love match? You don't fall madly in love and get married and live happily ever after. Obviously there is a potential for massive problems, okay? And one of the ones that's the worst is the potential for sexual harassment. What happens when two employees are dating? Oh, they're so happy, yay, and then they break up, but one of them can't give it up, okay? And they want to continue the relationship, and the other does not. And then they proceed to keep pursuing this person at work. Now remember, we said the number of times that you can ask a coworker out and they say no before it becomes sexual harassment is one time. So, do you see the potential for sexual harassment in the workplace here? Do you see why employers wish that they could ban people from dating even though they know they can't? The potential for disaster is tremendous. I mean, we hope that both people will be mature. If you choose to engage in a workplace romance, you have to be aware of the fact that you could break up. This could not end well. And you will have to go to work, and everybody will know, and this person will still be there. And you may have to interact with them on a daily basis and still get your work done, and, you know, in order to be productive and keep your job. You know, and I always say, is any date worth your career? And I hope the answer is no. That being said, ask me where I met my husband. That's right, we met at work. However, we did not work in the same organization. We did not work for the same people. And again, it was a massive corporation, and people could date within that corporation. And if it didn't work out, it really wasn't that difficult not to see the person. So as long as you weren't stupid enough to date within your own department, which I'm trying to remember, and I don't think I remember anyone doing that, it really wasn't a problem in that particular company. But I think you can see that the potential for issues is most definitely there. So, workplace romances. Let's talk about the consequences, both good and bad. And did you know that there can be good consequences. A lot of times married couples that work for the same organization actually have higher productivity and greater job satisfaction and a greater commitment to the organization. They both work there. They ride to work together, they have lunch together, and they ride home together. It can actually be positive. Now, on the other hand, of course, if things don't go well and people break up, we can see the opposite, and we could see their productivity decrease. We could see less job satisfaction and less organizational commitment and sexual harassment. So it kind of depends on the situation and what goes on. When those people get married, that's usually a good thing for the organization. Should they get divorced, it's a bad thing for the organization. When you are happy in your personal love life, you are generally a happier person at work and more productive. Now, the place where we see these relationships, even if it's a positive sexual relationship, the people are all happy, it's all good, it never seems to work out statistically if one person is mentoring the other. That is viewed very negatively by other employees. Even if it's not a boss subordinate situation, you could mentor somebody who is a colleague. They are the exact same level as you, but you might be mentoring them because you have more experience or whatever. Yeah, that one doesn't work out well. And when you have a mentor who's dating their protege, the mentoring relationship needs to be dissolved, and the people need to be given a different mentor. That does not work out well, both for the attitude of the people around them, and actually, for whatever reason, the protege does not get the same amount of mentoring and training. At least that's what the statistics bear out. And of course, you always have to worry about coworker reactions, because you don't want a sexual relationship in the workplace to have a negative effect on coworkers and actually drop their productivity because they're so busy complaining and worrying over this workplace romance that's going on. And always managerial response. Again, same thing. We want productivity. Remember, it's business. The bottom line is the bottom line. We want productivity up. So it just depends on the culture of that particular organization and how people feel about dating in general, or sometimes even that relationship specifically, depending on the situation. Because sometimes you work and you don't care. This person's dating somebody from over in shipping and receiving, like you care. It doesn't affect you. But attitudes can be a little bit different if the relationship gets closer. And it's two of your coworkers dating. That can actually make people very uncomfortable. If two of the people you work with on a regular basis, every day you see them both, and they start dating, a lot of times people don't like that. I would be one of them, because it gets weird. You know what I mean? That means they tell each other everything, they get mad at each other, or maybe they get mad if one of them gets mad at you, then both of them are mad at you. You know what I mean? It can actually be kind of a bad thing if the people work too closely together. So, how do we go about making the work environment comfortable for all, which is what I was just talking about? First of all, always a zero tolerance policy against sexual harassment. Always 100% not acceptable. Train managers not only how to handle it, but to actually recognize sexual harassment, because remember, as people, it is simply normal to project your own feelings and beliefs onto others and assume that they feel the same way you do. So maybe if you don't consider something sexual harassment, you will assume that others don't as well. And in reality, we know that everyone's thresholds are different. People come from different backgrounds and have different feelings. So it is important to train your managers how to recognize sexual harassment. Create a safe environment for employees to bring complaints of sexual harassment and other behaviors. They cannot be afraid. You can't have your people afraid of repercussions of coming forth and telling about what's going on. You have to investigate each and every allegation of sexual harassment, no matter how silly it may look at the outset. First of all, perspective. Just because you think it's silly doesn't necessarily mean the other person does. And sometimes what starts out looking harmless, once you actually delve into it, you might find out it's not at all. And there's a lot more going on than you realize. So it's vital. It's not just vital, it's the law. Every single allegation of sexual harassment has to be investigated, and appropriate action has to be taken. Offer counseling to employees who need help in handling sexual or other types of harassment and workplace romances. You know, we talked about the effects this could have on employees. It can be extremely difficult. And one of the things that most people fail to realize is the average person does not want to come forward and tell. And once they do, okay, they could feel like everyone hates them, and it may not be true at all, but they could have that feeling that, oh my gosh, now I'm going to be seen as the whistleblower and the troublemaker, and it could, again, could really hurt their productivity. Therefore, it behooves the organization to offer counseling, okay, not just with their manager, but somebody outside the organization that they could sit and talk to. And if the corporation is too small for that, to at least be able to refer them to an outside counselor for help. Never ignore sexual harassment directed towards you, even though it is the absolute natural thing to do, and it's what almost all of us do. I've done it. You want to pretend like it didn't happen. You're embarrassed, you're uncomfortable, you're hoping it'll just go away. It won't go away most times unless you confront it. Tell them immediately that's not acceptable and you need to stop it and not do it again. Notice I didn't use the word please in there. Or you're going to have to actually go file the complaint. You have your choice. Depending on the severity, if it's not extremely severe, confronting politely but firmly will usually help to take care of it. But if it doesn't, file the complaint. Don't wait until it gets horrible. File the complaint. Take organizational action when workplace romance affects the conduct of work. Okay, but ignore it otherwise. Don't you love that? It really does put the people who run the corporation in a tight spot. Like I said, they all wish they could prevent it from happening, but it's human nature. You can't. You're together too many hours a day. Your employees are just together too much for this not to happen at some point, okay? So, if it affects the quality of work, their conduct at work, and what could that be? That could be too busy on the phone talking to the person, too busy going over to their desk and talking to them. It could be they get a little smoochy or handy in the workplace. You know what I mean? That's when you're going to have to go and talk to them about it. But otherwise, if it doesn't affect any aspect of their work, it has to be ignored. The trick comes in when one of those people is married. Did they sign a morals clause when they went to work for the organization that said that they can't do that? The answer is probably 99% of the time, no, they didn't. Therefore, do you have any right as a manager or a leader to say anything to them? As long as it doesn't affect their work. Good question, At what point is it okay? And I think that that's the one that gets everybody morally. It's when you see people who are not married to each other engaging in a romance, that one really causes trouble. But if it doesn't affect their conduct at work, it doesn't affect any aspect of their work, and they did not sign a morals clause, you would have to actually talk to your legal people within the corporation before you could say anything, or else you could be hit for harassing them. And not sexually harassing, but just harassing them and not treating them fairly. Weigh the potential costs of a workplace romance against the potential benefits. What did I say earlier? Is that date worth your job? Is that worth your job? And that is always something to think about, says the woman who met her husband at work. So obviously sometimes, many times, the answer for people is yeah, it's worth the risk. The thing is are you going to date somebody right directly that works right with you in your same organization? Because boy, the potential for problems with that is huge. If you are going to date somebody in the workplace, you really actually need to have a discussion about what will happen after you start dating, and what if it doesn't work out. And those are uncomfortable conversations, because when you first start dating somebody, you know, everything's fabulous and wonderful and they're just the best thing ever and it could never go wrong. I say laughing so hard, right? We all remember feeling like that, don't we? And then a few weeks or months later you're looking back going, ew, what was I thinking? That potential is always there, and it does have to be weighed. So that's it for chapter 7. I want you to go to your personal forum real quick and give me a new thread that says ego motives. Ego motives. That's all you have to do. And then I can give you your points for the week.